About 15 minutes ago, it certainly wasn't bright sunshine, but it was basically a summer's day in Ireland. It was a little humid, a chance of possibly some rain. Nothing hammering down here at Oak Valley in Elgin. So a particularly introduction to this evening's live show brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, and welcome to Dan's epic wine route, which I am on yet again, traversing the same wine territory that the race moves through and taking some time during completed in these cooler climate areas, but also to get a sense of the bigger different areas. And so that's what we've been doing since Saturday, moving through Stellenbosch out to the Himalaya, now in Elgin, and headed Somerset West way, and a bit more of Stellenbosch from tomorrow. The catch up, not just about wine, but last time I saw him in person, he was just about to get married. He was holding hands under the table with a fiancée and staring into her eyes. And I can tell you what, having bumped into them last night, they're still exactly the same. It's lovely to see. So a little later on in the show, I'll be bringing in Jacques du Plessis, who's the winemaker at Oak Valley, and not just finding out how he's arrived here at Oak Valley and finding out how this estate has made its name as one of the really big grand producers of Elgin wine, but also getting an understanding of a new range of wine, a wine that is fiercely focused on terroir and giving off that sense of place that is becoming increasingly important to so many winemakers, and which ultimately should get the very best out of a particular stretch of terroir. So that is this evening's show. The rain has died down just a little, thankfully, which makes our lives a little easier. Before I introduce you to Jacques, though, and some of the wines he supplied for me, let's have a quick look at some news, which this week is mostly Dan's epic wine route. Oh, this was Tuesday morning. This was a really cool morning. Kevin Arnold in the middle, who's started a new chapter of his wine-making career out in Hermanus. He is making some wine in the cellar of the gentleman on the right, who is Chris Allied, Butch Allied, whose wines come from all over South Africa, but who has his home at Hemelrand, just below the Himalaya Ridge. And so I went through to have a look at the cellar, but also to chat to Kevin about his life in wine and the journey he has taken. And it was a history lesson. That's what it was. Just listening to Kevin Arnold, listening to him tell the story of where he'd been, what he'd done, who he'd met along the way. That, together with my tour of Chris's cellar, will both be coming up on Dan Really Likes Wine in the next month or so. And I also got the chance to catch up with probably the greatest force of nature in the South African wine industry at the moment. Barine Sauls is unstoppable. This is the woman who at the age of 19 got a job as an au pair for the Hamilton Russells. It didn't work out, but they spotted something special to her and they offered her a job within the winemaking operation. Fast forward to today, and she's not only making her own Tisselaarsdal range of wine, but the vineyard, yes, that is a vineyard you see here. It doesn't look like much of one now. That is the stretch of land, 16 hectares or thereabouts, that she's purchased just outside the village she grew up in, and that is showcasing the wine of the Himalaya. And you see that Tisselaarsdal label is a sketch of the scene in the background, the path that leads up over the hill and into Stanford, and that's it's a wonderful sense of history that now gets extended into her new space, which is going to be her own vineyard just outside the town. So look out for more news from Barine as her enchanting fairy tale continues. And we also got to spend some time with Emil. That's Emil Ross, the winemaker at Hamilton Russell, who's coming through. A challenging vintage. I think this has the potential to be a really good year, but everyone I've spoken to says it's one that will see good wines produced from those viticulturalists and those winemakers who've got a real sense and understanding of their vines, of their terroir, because with the rain in particular, it has been quite demanding. You see Emil looking just a little fatigued there. He's had a long session of making wine, but that Chardonnay and that Pinot Noir, two exceptional wines. You can see them there. But what made it really interesting was comparing them with two brand new wines, also a Hamilton Russell Pinot Noir and also a Hamilton Russell Chardonnay, but from Oregon. This is the new project that the Hamilton Russells have running over in America. And we had a lunch that was thrown by Olive and Anthony. We had some cool guests there. That would be Nikki van der Volt, unusually wearing black clothing 2 sizes too small, along with Leanne, his wife. We had Jason and Abali from the Norman Goodfellows team. Anthony there in the leg brace, injured himself skiing earlier this year. And Olive, and then that good-looking guy on the left, that's Ronaldo, our director, who occasionally sneaks into photos and we don't know he's there. And that was a beautiful lunch and a chance to try those Oregon wines that you're not going to see in South Africa. Simply the cost of them is going to make it prohibitive. But it was really cool to see a South African wine brand popping up with an extension in Oregon and making some wine, which was outstanding. Emil having a lot of fun with his other projects. And a quick look at Charles Fox. We were there yesterday morning. Zelda and Charles, they only do bubbles. And you can see there, they've now got 8 of them. Really interesting one in there. The third one from the left, that is their gold. It's what you'd probably call off-dry, 16 grams of residual sugar. 32 would make it demi-sec. So it's not a dry style, but it's also one that's not super sweet. So it's a nice middle ground that I think is going to find a lot of favor. Very populist type of bubbles and at a pretty good price. That's, I think, about 190 rand a bottle. So that's one to look out for, along with the rest of the Charles Fox family, which is now up to 8. I also got to spend some time with Bobby Wallace. That's drinking his Off the Record, the Syrah that Tim Atkin was raving about at his reveal of his report last year. And Bobby, son of Nikki and Paul, who are as hard a working couple as we have in the wine industry. They're not making wine, they're tasting it, traveling the country, going to wine shows. And there are Paul and Nikki out at Paul Wallace with a brand new vintage of the Black Dog. I think South Africa's best Malbec. That's the 2019 edition, and continuing a tradition of making very, very good South African Malbec, which is not something we say an awful lot of. Then here, Rosie Gunn, that's up at Iona, trying out the Sauvignon Blanc and having a chat about the quality of the Sauvignon Blanc that they make. They've got a secret that's not so much of a secret, tossing in 7% wooded Semillon just to give a little more structure and a touch more balance. And the result is a Sauvignon Blanc that is consistently one of South Africa's favorites. So Rosie, former sculptor, giving us the guided tour of Iona. And then had the chance to chat to one of the Belgians, a bit of a Belgian invasion. If it's not Almenkirk, it's Speenkop. If it's not Speenkop, it's Asher. This is Joris, a lawyer in Belgium, decided he wanted to be a winemaker in South Africa. And as anyone who's been to Almenkirk, his interpretation of cool climate wine is superb. And yes, there are the varietals you'd expect, but some of the Syrah being made, some of the Merlots, and the Sauvignon Blanc, an extension of their product range. And they're having a great deal of fun, Joris, together with Natalie, his wife, two very cool Belgians and a very popular part of the wine community here in Elgin. That was earlier today. That's James Downs, the farmer at Shannon and the Mount Bullet, which is arguably South Africa's premium Merlot, actually made by Gordon and Nadia Newton-Johnson up in the Hamiltonada. But the grapes are all from just down the road from where we are now at Oak Valley, so very much Elgin fruit, and a Merlot that's rewritten the book in no small way about premium Merlot in South Africa and our ability to both produce it, but also to charge what we should for it. And that's been a huge driver in Merlot's ascension to the kind of image that it had perhaps lost a little after movies like Sideways and people deciding they didn't really want to drink Merlot. And then wrapping up, I think we had one more visit. Yeah, there we go. That is Dudley, and this is over at Lothian. Dudley makes wine for Richard Kershaw. He is Richard's winemaker, but they make the wine for Lothian as well. And that Pinot Noir on the left, I think it was last year, got the IWC Best South African Red Wine Medal. Not Best Pinot Noir, but Best Medal. And that was a really great accolade for Elgin and for Pinot Noir. So there we go, a blur of people who we have seen over the course of this week. As I say that, the rain picks up. Probably an appropriate note on which to welcome a winemaker, I think, because normally they're farmers. They'd like rain, wouldn't they? Well, let's find out. Mr. du Plessis, welcome back to the show, and in person. And
welcome to Oak Valley.
Well, rather damp Oak Valley. Are we happy, or are we a little nervous about this sort of rain?
Well, the vines that we've harvested, I mean, you couldn't ask for more than a good post-harvest rain. But unfortunately, we are not quite done. We've got some grapes still hanging, and yeah, so hopefully we don't get too much tonight. But then again, this is Elgin. This is what makes us different. This is part of our terroir, and I guess we'll take it one day at a time. I think most of us in the valley are just tired and hoping to get the last grapes in.
I remember spending some time many years ago in Melbourne in Australia, which has got the daftest climate in the world. You can have 4 seasons before lunchtime.
Yeah.
And I kind of get the sense that living in Elgin is not too dissimilar, because every time I've asked a winemaker about the weather, they've been able to give me 3 different forecasts just for that day.
Yeah. And even within the valley, we've got different little spots of weather. We are sort of up here against the Groenlandberg, so it only takes a bit of a breeze from the southeast, and then we've got a little bit of drizzle happening on Oak Valley, but the same doesn't happen on the other side of the valley. And so within Elgin, there's serious diversity in climate and soil, which makes it even more complicated and interesting, I guess.
So it has the excitement element. There are lots of different things to draw from, but also probably has you reaching for the Prozac from time to time as you try and handle another day of unexpected conditions.
Yeah, no, every vintage brings its own challenges, but keeps us humble, I guess.
Well, you've got a beautiful space that we know from visiting here with the Upper Cape Epic for many, many years. And most people here for mountain biking. I'm here for the mountain biking and for the wine, and to appreciate it. But before we look at the wine, and in particular the wine you've got here, what about the Jacques du Plessis story? What was the journey that led you, first of all, into wine, and from there had you rocking up at the door at Oak Valley?
Well, I think the wine, I knew it. I wanted to make or go into a career which will allow me to be creative, but at the same time, sort of, I do have a passion for science. So I think winemaking presented that opportunity of creativity and science being balanced, but also the fact that every vintage is different. I love being outdoors. I love a challenge. I think the most alluring aspect of making wine is the fact that you'll never master it. Every vintage will be different, and the fact that you've got a tangible product every year that you can share with your friends and share with the world makes it really unique. And I mean the fact that you can stay on a beautiful place like this and really immerse yourself in that process is a really something that you must not take for granted. It's a real privilege.
So this is where you call home. What led you to Oak Valley?
Yeah, so I studied winemaking at Stellenbosch, graduated in 2008. I did my student practical in the Swartland at Saudi family 2008, and then I did another vintage in 2009. So that was a very creative environment, obviously, and I met some very good friends of mine from the industry still out there. Then I was in the Breda Kloof, which I think was at that stage sort of the only job I could get, but I was blown away with the potential. I was at Olifantsberg, which presented me an opportunity to learn a lot and to plant new vineyards, build a new winery, and work with Rhone varietals in a climate such as the Breda Kloof, which since then has proven to have been a good decision for them. They're doing really well. I was in Constantia for 3.5 years or so, which was fascinating, working more with Sauvignon Blanc for the first time in my life and some bubbles. And finally, when this opportunity came, there was just no decision to be made. It was instantly. I had to come here, and the opportunity to work for a farm that's very well established, that's learned a lot of lessons over the years, and that's where they are in terms of specialization. I couldn't say no. Yeah.
It's an area that's very different to where you've spent most of your time
Absolutely,
before.
yeah.
It's far younger than Constantia.
Yeah.
It's far greener than Swartland and Bredekloof as well.
Yeah.
When you move into this kind of area, I'm sure there's excitement at the opportunity, something different. But are there some nerves where, hang on, this is wildly different terroir, this climate's crazy different. Am I going to be able to handle all of this?
Look, I don't know what the Robbe and Viljoen family was thinking when they appointed someone who's never made Pinot before. I mean, I think the one thing I learned working in warmer climates, for example, was how the importance of acidity and your picking decision, basing that on acidity and pH instead of just sugar, and tasting a lot, and obviously working with phenomenal sites, being so important. So I think when it comes to making Chardonnay and Pinot, natural acidity is key, and in a climate like this, we are offered beautiful natural acidity. So yes, I think it taught me the importance of good farming, and regardless of the climate you find yourself in, that is still paramount. Yeah.
Tell me a bit about this community that you've moved into, because the people who I've encountered have not only been incredibly welcoming, and that's happened every time I've come here, but every few minutes in a conversation, oh yeah, and I had a braai with Paul last week, and Andries and I went cycling last Saturday, and it seems to be just one big village.
No, it's phenomenal in that regard. We are a small appellation, only a handful of us are making wine out here. It's close enough to Cape Town, but it's far enough away. It's close enough to the ocean. So we've got a seriously good lifestyle out here. Obviously fantastic mountain biking. But yeah, the apple farmers and the winemakers, all of us get along really nicely. It presents you with a slightly more calm and relaxed sort of environment, but it's phenomenal. And I must say, we've met some amazing friends out here.
The relationship with the apple farmers seems to be good. What about the relationship between grapes and apples? Because I do get a sense that there is pressure on the grapes to perform, because apples, while not making anything nearly as exciting as wine, do offer a slightly more solid commercial return.
Yeah, look, this year, for example, is a really challenging year for the apple side of the industry, because of all the storms we've had, a lot of wind, a lot of hail damage, so I think that it showed us the importance of diversification. Elgin presents you with an opportunity to not only make wine, you can grow apples and pears on the side, and I think that diversification in any appellation is something to consider, whether that means planting citrus in the Bredekloof or planting farming with beef out wherever. It's important to diversify, and I think the future of Elgin is not necessarily more vineyards but better vineyards. So there's a good balance that can be struck with ending up pulling the vines that are not working and just planting a smaller selection of cultivars that thrive in these sort of conditions. And I mean, this season again has proven it's not an easy place to farm. So when you do plant vines out here, you need to do your homework, and you need to focus on a very good site that's going to give you quality over quantity. I don't think Elgin will ever be in the game of producing high volumes. That's not the future of Elgin. So it's an exciting time to be here, because we are actively pursuing the best sites and the best clones, especially, and we'll get into clones just now.
Well, that leads into what I wanted to ask you about there, because if you're not making quantity, you then have to make quality.
Absolutely.
And if you're making quality, you have to get it as right as you can. Yeah. And this wealth of farming knowledge, just being back here for a few days and speaking to Dudley and Richard Kershaw about clones. I didn't speak to Richard, or I wouldn't be here yet. We'd still be having that conversation, because he's obsessed in the very best possible way. But speaking to James at Shannon, who is a farmer first and foremost, and he understands the land just as his father did before him, and he's worked on it so long. Paul Wallace, understanding why his Malbec works and why the certain vineyards are having the impact that they do. Not only have you got this terroir that can lend itself to making great wine, but you've got a collective understanding that you seem to be very happy to share to try and better each other and ensure that it's not about Oak Valley, it's not about Paul Wallace, it's about Elgin. And if we get brand Elgin right, then we all win.
Absolutely. And I think what's really amazed me about this valley is the fact that because it is farmers, not, it's very low key brands. It's nothing too flashy. We don't have big flashy wineries and big bells and whistles. It's this focus, and I think there's a farming mentality over instead of having something that you have high expectations in too short space of time. There's very much a long-term vision. Oak Valley, for example, is 5 generations old. 125 years of history. Paul Kluwer has generations of knowledge. So with that long-term vision comes patience. It proves that you're planting a vineyard now, maybe for your kids and your grandkids. I think we've learned serious mistakes or lessons from the past. But that's fine. It's tweaking the little details now and looking into the future collectively and pursuing what Elgin should be doing, which is cool climate winemaking.
Last one before we try some of the wine and you tell me the story behind this range. In the time that you've been here, what's the definitive lesson that you've been taught by Oak Valley, by Elgin as a young winemaker?
Wow. Well, I think really spend as much as of your time in the vineyards as you possibly can. I think it's not an easy place to farm, so never drop the ball in the vineyards, and then the winemaking will be very straightforward in the cellar. But you cannot cut any corners out in the vineyards.
Solid advice. Sounds very simple to do. The execution is a little more demanding. Right. There's this new range of wine, newish range. I haven't tried it yet, but I do know about it. I've read about it, and it sounds both fascinating, but also very passionate in its approach and the decision to focus as you have. So give us the overview. What prompted it, and why have you done this?
So I'm not sure if you've tasted our Chardonnay and Pinot called Groenlandberg, which is our estate blend, and that's our flagship. It tells the Oak Valley story, and that wine is essentially a blend because it's from different vineyards, different clones, different sites on the farm. And we realized that the only way that we can actually lift the level of the Groenlandberg range is to get to know the building blocks of that wine. And the only way to do that is to actually make some single vineyard, single clone wines that we can mature and bottle separately and then release later in order to actually see what that block contributes to the Groenlandberg blend. So this sort of started out as an R&D exercise in the cellar for us to keep everything apart as long as we can, and then to do small bottlings of a single vineyard in order to assess that over time. And then we realized how these wines could probably, it will be nice to share this with the public, and this range was born. So it's called Tabula Rasa, and it's Latin for clean slate. So basically, it's the opportunity of that we have to be on a sort of a blank canvas, and it's about looking at the details that make up our vineyards. So essentially, these wines we try to make at least 2 Chardonnays and 2 Pinots from one vintage. So we would go and we would see a specific vineyard that looks really very, very special in that year, and then we would keep that separate in the cellar, which we do with all our lots. We keep it separate anyway, and then we would keep that separate. And then when it comes to blending time, we would keep 2 barrels per clone separately. We would bottle that separately, and then we release it later. So this is now our 2020 vintage, which we're about to release quite soon. And then we have the opportunity of actually tasting these wines side by side, and then just getting to know the vineyards. And for us, that is really important. And it's been interesting to share these wines with the public and to to see the enthusiasm out there to actually journey with us in how we are going into the detail with Chardonnay and Pinot.
This is the kind of project that the accountants hate because it's tiny volumes.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of work and
Yes.
effort. It's costing you on all sorts of fronts.
Yes.
And so you're not doing this because this will have you in a new yacht by Christmas.
No.
You're doing this because this is your philosophy distilled down to a couple of bottles that by extension is the philosophy and the history and the heritage of wine here at Oak Valley.
And I think, so if I've worked for brands, for example, in the Swartland, where you work with vineyards from all over the place, and that is really exciting because you can build complexity into your blends by buying from different sites. When you work for a wine estate, it's very different. Yeah, it's literally delving into the detail. These vineyards are literally a stone's throw from one another on the same slope. So the only difference is the clone. So it's getting to know a singular piece of land that has very distinguishable features, same soil type, same aspect, same altitude, and that's interesting. So I think working for a wine estate, some people might think that might be a bit boring. When you have a range like this, it guarantees us to stay stimulated in the vineyard, and it makes it very creative in the winery as well.
All right, well, let's take the first two. So these are two examples of Chardonnay.
Yeah, so these are both from the 2020 vintage. The first glass is our clone 95. And this clone is quite widely planted in South Africa. It offers you a lot of lime, citrus, beautiful acidity we always get. And then, both these wines, you would find like a typical Elgin flintiness on the nose, like a struck match sort of quality. And on Oak Valley, we celebrate acidity, so we don't allow malolactic fermentation in our Chardonnays. But these two vineyards. So the second glass is clone 548, and 548 is a little bit more voluptuous, a lot more complex, a lot more textured. So these two are our two main blending components in our Groenlandberg. And these vineyards, as I mentioned, are literally right next to one another. And the winemaking is almost exactly the same between the two. So the only difference is really the clone. So on the 95, you find a more linear wine, quite very high in acidity, quite lean. And then the 548, a little bit fatter, rounded, more complex. It's the two together obviously make for a very nice blend.
Well, this is proper science experiment stuff in terms of working out what works well with what. What was that process to determining these are the clones of Chardonnay in this case that are going to suit Oak Valley?
Yeah. Well, it's a very exciting time to be planting because the nurseries are giving us phenomenal planting material, virus-free. Most importantly, I think that is paramount to get clean, virus-free material. But then for many years, we didn't have these options of clones. And for the last, I would say in the last 15 years, the nurseries have really lifted their game and also made sure to import newer clones. And a lot of the clones that we had 20, 30 years ago were brought in for production and higher yielding clones. And now, for example, these are the Dijon clones, and these clones are known for quality and good acidity and concentration. And importantly, the ability to ripen in a difficult climate. That is why they were introduced in Burgundy, but also that is why it works in a climate like Elgin that can present you with difficult conditions. It is very nice to work with these clones. And the whole clonal selection process only really started in the last 50 years, where you have guaranteed clean material of a specific characteristic. And so if you know that you want a clone that offers you a slightly more open bunch, or a clone that offers you a little bit more weighty palate, then we have that option. And I think as a winemaker, to have that in your arsenal of tools, it's a great thing to use.
It does, though, give you so many more colours to your palate.
It does, yeah.
So to speak, which is cool in terms of the opportunity. but does mean there are now so many different options.
Yeah.
Deciding on what to go with and
Yeah.
working out, yep, this is the one, maybe not that one so much.
Mm.
And even then, you've got a bit of climate change. You've got every year there's a different set of impacts and inputs to a vintage. It's a very moving target.
It is, I think, but again, back to the long-term or long-term vision that you have on a farm like this. We have patience. It obviously takes many years to get to know the vineyards, but I mean, we are actively planting, and what we typically do is we've planted over the last 10 years little pockets of newer clones. And then we would look at that, look at the potential of that, and then we would plant a larger block. So this is not a quick result. It takes years. We started this project into 2016, so we're just starting out. But again, we've got time. Yeah, maybe the next generation can drink the bitter wines.
I think this one's drinking some pretty good stuff to start with. So there is a Chardonnay, and you give us a very clear indication. Take us over to the Pinot Noir, and is it pretty much the same process?
Yeah, so the difference, I think, with Pinot specifically is it's a very old cultivar, so it's had thousands of years to mutate essentially, and to form these different interpretations of Pinot Noir. And there are serious differences between the clones that we've seen. So, for example, the glass on the left is clone 667, and also a Dijon clone. And this clone gives you very pronounced color, very good natural acidity, a wine with a real high extract. So quite a big wine that even in a blind tasting, you might not pick as a Pinot. You might think it's a cool climate Cab Franc. So this is we love to bottle this because it shows a side of Pinot that many people don't know. And on the right is our clone 115, and this is from a vineyard that is planted at 10,000 vines per hectare, so a very high density vineyard. And 115 is planted. It's quite common in Elgin and in Yamal Valley. It's the most classic of the Dijon clones. So yeah, it's just always for us. These wines must be enjoyed next to one another, because then you can pick up the different nuances. And yeah, it's these are interesting wines, not necessarily just good wines.
You're always striving to make the best wine you possibly can, and generally, I think you're pretty happy with what you do there. But what about the elements of surprise? Are there cases when a wine like this delivers something to you as the winemaker, you go, sure, I wasn't quite expecting that. That's
absolutely
surpassed my expectations. Or given me something different. Absolutely,
and again, every vintage is different. So, for example, on Pinot, a tool that we have that we can use is to include the stems to do a whole bunch fermentation, for example. And with a range like this, we can be very creative in the cellar. So we try to keep things separately in the winery for as far as we possibly can. But sometimes a vineyard that looks amazing doesn't necessarily mean that the wine is that phenomenal. Maybe it can be a bit straightforward, or maybe we would look at one block that gives us slightly riper stems in that year, and then we would do a whole bunch fermentation, and then suddenly, we are really surprised with how the stems actually contributed a lot to that specific wine. So again, working with such small volumes, it allows for creativity, and obviously we get it wrong every now and then as well, and then we don't bottle it. But when you get it right, it's interesting to share with people that find it interesting.
The crafting of these wines is clearly very important to your identity as an estate and what you want the world to know about what you do. It's something that also is part of that bigger drive for Elgin at the moment of a Chardonnay and Pinot Noir home, and not just in South African terms, but globally, one of the great capitals of these two grapes. Is this kind of experimentation something that's quite unique to you, or is it the kind of thing we'll find in Burgundy or in Oregon or in other places where they're using these grapes?
Yeah, I would hope so. I think doing these sort of behind the scenes research and development projects is really important, and Yeah, I definitely in Elgin. Most of us are really pursuing quality, and in order to do that, you do need to farm better and get to know your vineyards better, and work with good planting material. So yeah, I think many of us in the valley are doing that, and we are starting to see the result of that. And I think what's interesting with any appellation, I think as you mature, you start specializing, and I think in Elgin especially, we've got this. Many of the farms have learned that Chardonnay and Pinot does work. Obviously, there's a place for cool climate Syrah, for example, with Rosie's wine, and obviously Iona makes fantastic Sauvignon Blanc. But when it comes to producing estate wines at this price point, I think most of us have that in common, that Chardonnay and Pinot tends to thrive here. And we haven't even chatted about the climate, which I should probably tell you a bit about too.
Well, at the moment, it looks wet.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing Chardonnay and Pinot ripens early. So if you do plant it in a warm area, it's going to ripen sort of in January and give you wines that are not all too interesting. When you're working in a climate like this and you've got these cloudy conditions, you've got frequent rainfall, the whole season is stretched out. So, even though our season starts at the same time as Stellenbosch or even the Swartland, our budding time is very similar to the other regions, but we harvest so much later. So that hang time of the grapes in the vineyard and slow accumulation of sugar gives us phenomenal fruit and floral notes in our wines. And it gives us wines that we don't have to overwhelm in the winery with a lot of oak, which is fantastic. I think our wines have the ability to shine on its own, and be very pure.
The conversation I had earlier today with your neighbour Dudley, who takes some of your grapes or some of his stuff and works very closely with you. He spoke about how often their wines show better at international competitions than they do here in South Africa. And if I look at a wine list in a restaurant in South Africa, or if I look at just the drinking preferences of my friends, there's still that group that will not drink Chardonnay because they've got that age-old bias because they once had a glass that tasted like a piece of wood and they don't want any anymore. And you also have, I think, more people who enjoy Pinot Noir, but there is still a big drive for other varietals. And Chardonnay and Pinot Noir have probably still got some work to do in terms of winning over the local market. Yeah. Is that happening? Are you seeing that happening? Are we, as South Africans, understanding just how good we've got it with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir?
Yeah, I think until a few years ago, a wine was either unwooded or heavily wooded, and I think most of the areas have in the last few years proven that you don't have to over oak. I mean, yes, economical reasons also have forced us to use less oak, but it just showed us that it's all about balance. A wine can be respectfully oaked. For example, we use about 28 to 30% new oak, nothing more in our Chardonnays and our Pinots. And not that we can't afford more oak, it's just we find anything more than that to be too much. And we use larger barrels, for example, as well. So I think there's consumers have realized that a wine can be lightly wooded and a wine can be complex and deep and mineral, but at the same time have layers of depth, complexity. It doesn't mean that a wine is just zesty and fresh or tasting like an oak tree. It can be in the middle where there's balance. And it's been interesting to taste these sort of wines with someone that would say that they don't drink Chardonnay, and then they are often surprised.
The nature of them is also subject to change as they get a little bit older. What is your philosophy as a winemaker in terms of making wine where you seek that often quite tricky balance of something that can be drunk as it is released, because that's what most people are doing, if we're honest, but yet still hold out if needed. So somebody like me who wants to keep it for 10, 15 years will be suitably rewarded for doing so.
No, look, that's a difficult one because the Elgin wines they age incredibly well, and most of us make small volumes, so we are often under the pressure to release our wines too young, and it's unfortunate, but luckily a lot of people do enjoy wines that are quite austere and lean, and there's a place for it. But again, back to your portfolio, we have Chardonnays on 3 different tiers. Our one we release very young and fresh. Our Groenlandberg range we release a little bit older, and then with this range we release after only at least 2 or 3 years in bottle. So it's it presents us with the opportunity of releasing Chardonnay at different rates of maturation. But generally, rule of thumb, we try to convince our buyers to be patient, put it away in the cupboard for at least 5 years, and maybe then drink it if you've got the discipline.
Well, speaking of the buyers, one of the people watching at the moment, Michael Buddha, says, hello from Germany. We just returned from the Winelands. Enjoyed Oak Valley very much. The tapas menu was great. The Riesling was fine. So, Michael Buddha, thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying the show. And Michael does for me what I was going to do anyway, which was raise the subject of 1 or 2 of the other varietals. Because as much as the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are the drivers in this image of Elgin, and I know that's a very deliberate collective thought from everybody. We just have to go around and go down to Shannon and drink some Merlot, or to Iona for some Sauvignon Blanc, or to Paul Wallace and try some of the Malbec, or to Paul Kluwer, or to yourselves where Riesling has just been mentioned there by Michael. So you've got, yes, these are the wines that are our headline acts, these are the star attractions, but both your bonus and your challenge, I suppose, is there are all these other varietals that you can also deliver something pretty impressive from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Elgin has definitely proven we can make fantastic Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, this climate, as much as it's suited to Chardonnay and Pinot, automatically I think it's suited to Sauvignon Blanc. We've our Sauvignon Blanc, called the Fountain of Youth, is beautifully fresh. It's a style of Sauvignon that's not just about fruit. There's a mineral edge to the wine. Elgin Sauvignon Blanc tends to have that slight flintiness on the nose, and many of us include a little bit of Semillon to give it some weight. But yes, and Riesling, very difficult wine to get right in the cellar. So it's interesting to work with Riesling as well. And yeah, you can never generalize in an appellation and say everyone must now just Blanchard and Pinot. I think all of us have to come up with a portfolio that we think works on our farms, and those 4 varietals have proven that it really works. But at the same time, Cool Climate Syrah, for example, is just as fascinating. But yeah, as I mentioned, the diversity in Elgin allows for some farms to plant Syrah and other farms to not. So that's interesting.
And how important is that to you as a winemaker to not just be tied down to the 2 varietals, as much fun as you're having with these different interpretations, and be able to do stuff that stretches you a bit more as a winemaker and asks questions of your ability that will hopefully, when answered, make you a better, more rounded winemaker?
Yeah, look, I think it's nice to get given a lot of freedom, and I get given a lot of freedom, which I really appreciate. But I think focus is really important. I think South Africa has it's an important lesson for us to learn is if you get given a piece of land, then please don't go ahead and plant anything from Sauvignon Blanc to port varietals just because you've got the land available. We've had for many years we made a Bordeaux blend on the farm, and we've made a Syrah in the past. But when you come to this point as a brand and you realize that the future is very much focus and being known for something and being really good at that, I think that's important. And then if you can always buy grapes from other areas if you are really wanting to play around with different styles. But for us, focus is everything. Yeah.
The focus can never only be on the wine, though. You're going to be a pretty boring and one-dimensional person if that's the case, and it's never the case with winemakers.
No.
one or two of the really obsessive times in that you're either off surfing or you're playing a bit of golf, or in your case, doing a bit of mountain biking. You've got this playground here at Oak Valley that you had a tough day in the cellar. You can go out and blow off some steam and do something a bit different.
I must say, it's a phenomenal luxury to wake up and be able to do that. I mean, it's a big farm with 1,600 hectares. There's a lot of trails to be ridden, and also we're not far from the ocean, so it's very nice to often, even after work, go for a quick go to the beach, go for a quick surf. But I think mountain biking on Oak Valley is iconic, and with the Epic here, it proves that that we've got world-class trails, and I think that combination of being able to share wine and that healthy lifestyle is phenomenal. So it's good.
You mentioned going for the occasional surf. Are you getting lessons from the reigning Vintners Cup Ladies Champion?
Yeah, I stay on the 9-foot board. So no, she really enjoys her surfing, and hopefully this year she will take the prize again. But no, I'll be there for the moral support, and then riding the 2-footers.
As I mentioned at the start of the show, when we kind of sat down properly last year, it was with both you and Sarah. You were just about to get married. Married life certainly seems to be treating you well.
Yeah.
What is it like being married to sharing life with somebody who is just as passionate about wine, who's also in the industry?
Look, I wish I could say we saw a lot of one another the last 2 months, but it's not been the case. Very late nights in the winery. So finally now things are calming down up at the cellar. But it's really interesting to share that passion with someone, and especially since she's on the sales side, and I'm on the farming side and the production side. There's a good balance, and I think both of us work for good brands, so we're building up a bit of a collection of good wines and putting some aside. And it's phenomenal, and obviously sharing good food is as important. And just sharing this community and this farm is good.
You mentioned the good food. Before we wrap up and say goodbye, we must make mention of where we are, not just at Oak Valley itself, but here at the Melting Pot, which is it's won some great awards. It's got great recognition. It's making some devastatingly good food.
John is a very talented chef and a very curious chef. I think winemakers and chefs, that's why we tend to get along. And as much as we push the envelope in the winery, John really pushes it in his restaurant here, working with some phenomenal ingredients. It's quite daring to make the food that he's making out in Elgin, and so far it's been a phenomenal success. And we love to come here and share good food and wine. And it's been very popular for people to come and sit here at the Melting Pot. And John is doing a phenomenal job.
I think his food and your wine are in competition for who's doing it better at Oak Valley, and that means people like me who drop by are winning on every front, as I have this evening with both the company and the quality of wine. So thank you. I leave you with one final query. And that's going forward, because you're still a very young winemaker. You've done a lot in a relatively short space of time. You're definitely finding your feet very firmly here at Oak Valley. How does the next stretch forward, the horizon, look for you?
Sure. No, I think we tend to be too impatient in South Africa. I think it's just great to be able to work for a brand where you can settle down and really delve into the details. And when it comes to planting new vineyards, then you want to stick around for a while to see how those vineyards grow up, and you want to make wine from those vineyards. So there's absolutely no plan to move anywhere anytime soon. Just loving it out here.
I can see why.
Yeah.
I can see why. Jacques, thank you. You've shared some terrific wine, but also some wonderful insights as to why you're doing what you do, how you're doing it, and how that philosophy is shaped. And it's always a learning process for me, but hopefully everybody else who's been watching has also got a bit of an understanding of what makes Oak Valley special, what makes Elgin special, and what makes your wine special. So thank you.
It's my absolute pleasure. Yeah.
So there we go. That wraps us up for Dan Really Likes Wine with Norman Goodfellows this evening. I'm going to wander off to host tonight's prize giving at the Absa Cape Epic possibly with a surreptitious glass of wine in hand, as we move towards the grand finale out at Val de Vie on Sunday and the end of the 19th edition of the world's foremost mountain bike event, which for me has the added bonus of trailing through the winelands and affording me a chance of catching up with people like Jacques and learning a little bit more about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and why they're delivering wine that is so special. And that has very much been the case today. Join us back on the live show on Monday, where it's a wrap from Provine. We'll be speaking to some of the South African producers and wine figures who were over in Germany to see how well South Africa did, what sort of reception we got, and what the rest of the wine world is looking like. Don't forget the weekly magazine show as well. And when you get a moment, drop in on the Dan Really Likes Wine digital pop-up store on the Norman Goodfellows website. There's some really exciting wine, including the wine of Delagrave. And if you buy any bottle before the end of this month at Norman Goodfellows in-store or online, there could be 2 nights plus flights valued at 80,000 Rand coming your way as a very special prize from Delagrave, Dan Really Likes Wine, and Norman Goodfellows. My prize sits in front of me, 4 glasses of extraordinary wine and a wonderful lesson in how wine comparatively can have just those tiny little differences, but ultimately they're quite important ones. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Keep drinking South African wine. We'll see you back on the show live on Monday evening from Oak Valley with Jacques du Plessis. Goodbye.